I still remember the cold. Not the kind you feel on your skin, not wind or frost or the chill of deep space. This was different. This was the cold that crawls into the center of your chest and sits there, heavy, like a stone made of silence. The kind of cold that comes when you realize, truly realize, that everything you have ever known is gone. My name is Valen Soreth. I am, or I was, a record keeper for the Iothari Collective, third planetary cluster Mirovan system. If you had asked me 5 solar rotations ago what I thought about humans, I would have given you the standard answer, the polite answer, the one every species in the galactic concordance gives when the subject comes up. Interesting, primitive, emotional, best kept at a distance. That was what we all said. That was what we all believed. I am telling you this now because the galaxy needs to understand what actually happened. Not the version the concordance broadcasts, not the sanitized diplomatic summary. The real thing, what I saw with my own eyes, what I felt in my own bones. Because the humans didn't just give us shelter. They stood between us and annihilation, and they did it for no reason that made sense to anyone but them. It started with the burning. That's what we call it now. The burning, simple word, clean. It doesn't capture a fraction of what it was, but the Iothari language doesn't have vocabulary for that kind of destruction. We never needed it before. The Drekari Dominion had been expanding for decades. Everyone knew it. The Concordance knew it. The Senate councils on Vathira Prime knew it. They discussed it in committee rooms with polished floors and rotating holographic displays. They wrote position papers. They issued warnings. Formal, carefully worded warnings that the Drekari received, read, and probably laughed at. The Drekari don't negotiate. They don't threaten either, not really. They just arrive. One day your sky is clear, and the next it's filled with their carrier ships, massive, angular things that block out the stars like wounds cut into the night. They came to the Mirovan system on what should have been a celebration day, the festival of returning light. It happens once every 4 solar rotations when our twin stars align in a way that bathes the third planet, my planet, Eos, in a golden luminescence that lasts for 3 full days. Children play in the streets. Families gather on rooftops. Elders sing the old songs. I was on the roof of my dwelling with my daughter, Naeth. She was 9 rotations old, small for her age. Quiet the way I was quiet as a child. She had her mother's eyes wide and dark, the color of deep water. She was holding a festival lantern, the paper kind that you light from within and release into the sky. She was waiting for the right moment. There's a tradition, you whisper a hope into the lantern before you let it go. She was trying to decide what to whisper. She never got to release it. The first Drekari ship broke atmosphere at 14:07 local time. I know the exact moment because the timestamp seared itself into my memory the way a brand sears into flesh. The sky split. That's the only way I can describe it. A sound like reality tearing at the seams. And then the carrier, God, the size of it, descending through the golden light of the festival, turning everything beautiful into a shadow. Naeth dropped the lantern. It hit the roof tiles and the small flame inside it went out. Father, she said, just that. Just my name in her mouth, shaped like a question. I grabbed her hand. I didn't say anything. I couldn't, because I already knew. Every Iothari who had studied the Drekari expansion pattern knew. When the carriers come, they don't come to talk. They come to replace you. The evacuation was chaos. I won't dress it up or make it sound orderly because it wasn't. The planetary defense grid, which the Senate had assured us was state-of-the-art, lasted approximately 40 minutes. 40 minutes. 3 generations of engineering and investment and political speeches about security, and it held for 40 minutes against the Drekari pulse cannons. After that, the ground bombardment started. I won't describe it in detail. Some memories deserve to stay in the dark. But I will tell you this, I carried Naeth through streets that no longer existed. Buildings I had walked past every day of my life were just gone, replaced by craters and dust and the smell of something burning that wasn't wood or metal but something else. Something organic, something that had been alive minutes ago. We reached the evacuation port at the southern edge of the capital. Thousands of Iothari were already there, packed together, pushing, crying. Some of them were injured, burns, broken limbs, the blank stare of shock. The evacuation transports were old freighters, civilian vessels, anything that could carry bodies off the surface. They weren't designed for this. Nothing was designed for this. I got Naeth onto a freighter, vessel designation K-1174. I remember the number because I had to push past a crowd to read it on the hull, and my mind locked onto it like an anchor. Naeth was pressed against my chest, her arms around my neck, her face buried in my shoulder. "Don't look," I kept saying. "Keep your eyes closed. We're going on a trip." She didn't believe me. She was 9, not stupid. But she kept her eyes closed anyway because children trust their parents even when they know the truth. The freighter lifted off at an angle, one engine sputtering, the hull groaning with the weight of too many passengers. Through the viewport, I watched Eos shrink below us. The golden light of the festival was gone. In its place, fire, columns of smoke reaching up like fingers trying to grab us and pull us back down. My wife Thuris was on another transport, a different vessel. We'd been separated in the crowd. I kept telling myself she made it. She had to have made it. She was strong, stronger than me if I'm honest. She would have fought her way onto a ship. She would have. I found out later that she didn't. Her transport was hit during ascent. Direct strike from a Drekari interceptor. No survivors. But I didn't know that yet. Not on that day. On that day, I still had hope. And maybe that's the cruelest part, not the loss itself, but the hours and days afterward when you're still carrying hope around like a living thing inside your chest, feeding it, protecting it, not knowing it's already dead. The convoy, if you could call it that, was a mess. 17 civilian vessels, 2 damaged patrol corvettes, and 1 medical frigate that was running out of supplies before we even cleared the system. No military escort, no coordinated flight plan. Just a loose cluster of ships full of terrified people drifting toward the only thing that was left. Anywhere else? The Concordance channels were flooded with distress signals, not just from us. The Drekari had hit 3 systems simultaneously. The Velthari reached the sunken provinces of Aurelis and us, the Mirovan system, coordinated, efficient, brutal. The Concordance response was exactly what you'd expect from a bureaucracy facing an existential threat, slow, fragmented, and wrapped in procedure. We sent formal requests for asylum to 14 member worlds. 14. I helped draft some of them myself because even in exile, a record keeper has skills that matter. I chose my words carefully, diplomatic language, respectful, measured. We explained our situation. We provided population counts, medical needs, resource requirements. We attached documentation of the attack. Sensor logs, casualty estimates. 13 worlds responded within the first cycle. Every single one said no. Not harshly, mind you. That's not how galactic diplomacy works. They were very polite about it, very sympathetic. The Valanthi Senate expressed deep concern and offered moral support. The Calith Federation cited resource limitations and domestic stability concerns. The Orvani Collective, and this one stung the worst because we had a mutual defense treaty with them, said the treaty did not extend to refugee resettlement and wished us fortitude in this difficult time. Fortitude? They wished us fortitude while our children were sleeping on the floors of cargo bays, eating emergency rations that were designed for 2-week supply runs, not indefinite exile. The 14th World didn't respond at all. We later learned their government had collapsed under its own political crisis and couldn't process external communications. So there we were, 17 ships, 12,000 Iathari, drifting. My daughter stopped speaking on the 3rd day, not because she was injured, not because she was angry, she just stopped. She would look at me with those dark eyes, and I could see everything she wanted to say trapped behind them, but the words wouldn't come. The trauma counselor on our ship, a retired healer who was barely holding herself together, told me it was common. Shock response. The mind protecting itself. I held Naeth's hand and told her stories, old ones. The kind my grandmother used to tell me about the crystal plains and the first singers. I don't know if she heard me, but I kept talking because if I stopped, the silence would eat me alive. On the 7th day, our lead navigator picked up a signal. It wasn't Concordance frequency. It wasn't Drekari either. We checked that immediately because every unknown signal made our hearts stop. It was something else. A broad-spectrum broadcast on an open channel, unencrypted. No diplomatic preamble, no formal identification headers. Just a voice. A human voice. This is Captain Alara Vasquez of the United Earth Naval Vessel Carthage. We are receiving your distress signals. Please respond with your position, population count, and immediate needs. We are en route to your location. ETA 9 hours, hang on. That was it, no committee review. No, we'll get back to you. No request for documentation or asylum applications or treaty references. just hang on. I was in the communications bay when the message came through. Standing behind our lead comm officer, a woman named Drella who had been sending distress calls on loop for 5 days straight, her voice getting hoarser with each transmission. When the human voice came through the speakers, Drella stopped mid-sentence. She looked at me. I looked at her. "Is that real?" she whispered. I didn't know it could have been a trap. The Drekari had been known to use signal spoofing, but something about the voice, the directness of it, the lack of pretense, felt different. It felt like someone who actually intended to show up. "Respond," I said. "Give them everything." Drella transmitted our coordinates, our population breakdown, our medical situation, our supply status. She sent it all in one burst, fingers shaking on the console. Then she sat back and stared at the speaker like it might speak again. It did 20 minutes later. "Copy all convoy. Captain Vasquez here. We're bringing 3 escort frigates and a support carrier. Medical teams are prepping now. We have space for your entire population on the carrier, but if your ships are still flight-capable, we'll escort you the rest of the way instead. Your call." Your call. 2 words. I had spent 7 days begging 14 governments for help, and all I got was bureaucratic sympathy. This human, this captain, I had never met, from a species most of the galaxy considered barely civilized, gave me 2 words that contained more dignity than every diplomatic response combined. Your call. The human ships arrived in 8 hours, not 9. They came out of faster-than-light transit in a formation that our navigator said was aggressive defensive positioning. 3 frigates, mid-size warships with angular hulls and visible weapon arrays, flanking a much larger support carrier. The carrier was called the Meridian. It was enormous by human standards, though modest compared to a Drekari command vessel. But it wasn't the size that struck me. It was the markings. Every human vessel carried the same emblem on its hull, a blue circle with a stylized white bird in the center, wings spread. Beneath it, in the galactic common script, were the words, United Earth Humanitarian Fleet, Search and Rescue Division. They had a fleet dedicated to this. Not war, not conquest. Rescue. They had built warships and staffed them and trained crews specifically for the purpose of going into dangerous space to pull strangers out of the fire. I learned later that the Search and Rescue Division was only 4 years old. Humanity had created it after the Thessan refugee crisis, when 60,000 Thessan civilians died in the void because no one came for them. The humans, who hadn't even been involved in the conflict, watched the death toll climb from their corner of the galaxy and apparently decided that watching was unacceptable. So they built a fleet, not because anyone asked them to, not because they had a treaty obligation, because, as one of their politicians reportedly said during the budget hearing, we can't call ourselves a civilization if we let people die in the dark. Let me say that again, because I don't think the weight of it lands the first time. They built warships to save people they had never met, and they sent those warships into contested space, risking their own crews, spending their own resources for no strategic benefit whatsoever. When I tell other species this, they don't believe me. They think there must have been an angle, a trade deal, a political calculation, some hidden motive. There wasn't. I've read the internal documents. The humans declassified most of them because of course they did. The decision to create the Search and Rescue Division was driven by public outrage. Ordinary humans, teachers, engineers, farmers, shopkeepers saw footage of the Thessan refugees dying in their ships and demanded that their government do something. Not for profit, not for influence. Because it was wrong and they couldn't stand it. Captain Vasquez docked with our lead vessel within an hour of arrival. She came aboard with a medical team and 2 officers. No weapons drawn, no security detail. Just a woman in a dark blue uniform with captain's bars on her collar, and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in 30 hours. She was shorter than I expected. Humans are generally smaller than Iathari. We stand about a head taller on average, but she carried herself like someone who had never once in her life considered whether she was tall enough for anything. There was a steadiness to her. Not coldness, not rigidity. Just a centered calm, the kind you see in people who have stared at terrible things and decided to keep functioning anyway. She stepped through the airlock into our main corridor and stopped. I was standing there with Drella and 2 of our convoy elders. Around us, the corridor was packed with Iathari, sitting on the floor, leaning against walls, children tucked into corners. The air was thick and stale. The lighting was dim because we'd been conserving power. It smelled like too many bodies in too small a space for too many days. Vasquez looked at all of it. Her jaw tightened, not in disgust, in anger. I could see it in her eyes. She was furious, not at us, at the situation, at the fact that this was happening and no one else had shown up. "Who's in charge?" she asked. "I am the senior elder of this vessel," said Counselor Brethon, stepping forward. He was old, thin. He had a wound on his arm from the evacuation that had been poorly bandaged and was starting to discolor. He spoke with the rigid formality of a man trying to hold onto whatever authority he had left, because without it, he was just another refugee. Vasquez looked at his arm. "Sir, my medical team is going to treat that wound right now while we talk." It wasn't a request. It wasn't forceful either. It was just certain, like gravity. A medic stepped forward and began working on Brethon's arm before he could object. He blinked, startled by the efficiency of it. "Your convoy," Vasquez continued. 17 vessels. How many are flight stable?" 12, Brethon said. 5 have significant engine damage. One has been venting atmosphere from a hull breach that we sealed but cannot fully repair." "Which one is venting?" "Vessel K-4012, aft section." Vasquez touched her earpiece. "Carthage, this is Vasquez. I need a repair crew on vessel K-4012 immediately. Hull breach, aft section, sealed but unstable. Prioritize." She looked back at Brethon. "How are your food stores?" "Exhausted. We are rationing emergency supplements. Perhaps 2 more days." "Medical supplies?" "Nearly gone. We have wounded who need surgery and no facilities to perform it." Vasquez nodded, not surprised, not overwhelmed, just processing the way a captain processes tactical information. She turned to one of her officers. "Lieutenant, begin transfers, critical medical cases to the Meridian first. Children and elderly second. Everyone else follows. I want hot meals being served on the carrier within 90 minutes. Set up temporary quarters in cargo bays 3 through 7. Full bedding, sanitation, everything." The lieutenant, a young man with dark skin and serious eyes, saluted and moved. Fast, no hesitation. Vasquez turned back to us. "I know you've been through hell. I know you're exhausted and scared and probably don't trust a single thing anyone says right now. That's fine. You don't have to trust me. But here's what's going to happen. We're going to feed your people, treat your wounded, fix your ships, and escort you to a safe location. If you want to go somewhere specific, tell me and we'll take you there. If you don't have a destination, we'll bring you to Earth. We have settlements prepared for refugee populations. Housing, schools, medical centers, the whole thing." Counselor Brethon stared at her. The medic had finished bandaging his arm, and he was holding it like he'd forgotten it was attached to his body. "You are offering a settlement on your homeworld?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Why?" Vasquez paused. For the first time, her composure shifted, not breaking, just softening, like a window opening slightly in a sealed room. "Because you need somewhere to go," she said, "and we have room." The transfer took 6 hours. I carried Naeth through the docking tube that connected our freighter to the Meridian, and when we stepped onto the carrier, my daughter did something she hadn't done in 4 days. She looked up. The Meridian's main atrium was an open space, 3 decks high, with artificial lighting that mimicked natural sunlight. There were plants, actual living plants in beds along the walkways. The air was clean, not recycled stale freighter clean, actually clean. It smelled like water and green things and something warm like bread. Naeth lifted her head from my shoulder and looked around. Her eyes moved slowly across the space, the lights, the plants, the human crew members walking purposefully in their dark uniforms. A woman in a medical coat passed us and smiled at Naeth, just a small smile, brief, warm. Naeth's hand tightened on my collar. "It's safe here," I told her. "These are the humans. They came to help us." She didn't speak, but she kept looking. That was enough. They led us to a cargo bay that had been converted, and I use that word carefully because the speed at which they did it was staggering, into a temporary living space. The floor was covered with thick padded mats. Partitions had been set up to create semi-private family areas. Each area had bedding, a small light, a water dispenser, and a basket containing what I later learned was a standard human comfort kit. Soap, a towel, a toothbrush, a comb, a small package of dried fruit, and a piece of chocolate. Chocolate, I had never tasted it before. Naeth hadn't either. I opened the package and gave her a piece. She held it in her fingers, looking at it suspiciously. Then she put it in her mouth. Her eyes widened. For a moment, just a moment, she was a child again, not a refugee, not a trauma survivor, just a 9-year-old girl tasting something unexpectedly wonderful. She looked at me, and the ghost of something that might have been a smile passed across her face. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I turned away so she wouldn't see me cry. The human crew worked around the clock. I watched them, partly because I had nothing else to do, and partly because I genuinely could not understand what I was seeing. They assigned each family a human liaison, a crew member whose job it was to check on them, answer questions, and make sure their needs were met. Ours was a young woman named Corporal Alina Mwangi. She was 23 years old. She had short hair, a gap between her front teeth, and a way of speaking that was direct without being blunt. She knelt down to Nath's eye level the first time they met. "Hey," she said, "I'm Alina. I'm going to be hanging around a lot. If you need anything, food, a blanket, company, someone to be annoyed at, I'm your person. Deal." Nath stared at her. Alina didn't push. She just smiled, stood up, and turned to me. "She's not talking." "No, since the attack." Alina nodded. No pity in her face. No discomfort, just understanding. "My little brother went through something similar when we lost our house in the floods. Took him about 3 weeks to come back. He's fine now, talks too much, actually." She said it casually, like she was sharing a recipe or a weather report. But the message underneath was precise. Your daughter will come back to you. Give it time. I didn't know how to respond. In the concordance, kindness between strangers was transactional. You were polite because politeness maintained order. You helped because reciprocity was expected. This was different. Alina had no reason to share a personal story with me. She wasn't going to get anything from my gratitude. She did it because she thought it might ease my fear. Just that, nothing more. On the second day aboard the Meridian, I was summoned to a meeting with Captain Vasquez. The word "summoned" is wrong. A junior officer asked me politely if I had time to speak with the captain, as if I had pressing engagements. But I followed him to the command deck, where Vasquez was standing at a tactical display with 2 of her officers and Counselor Brethon. The display showed our sector of space. Our convoy's route was marked in blue. The Drekari expansion zones were marked in red, and between us and the nearest Drekari patrol corridor there was uncomfortably little distance. "Record Keeper Soreth," Vasquez said, nodding at me. "Thank you for coming. I want to brief you on our situation because your counselor tells me you have the best understanding of Drekari operational patterns." I did. It was part of my job as a record keeper, tracking geopolitical movements, cataloging military deployments, maintaining the kind of data that bureaucrats ignore until it's too late. "The Drekari have established a patrol line here," Vasquez said, pointing to a corridor of red dots on the display. "Our route to Earth takes us within 3 light hours of that line. My intelligence officer believes there's a 30% chance they'll detect our convoy during transit." "What happens if they detect us?" I asked. Vasquez met my eyes. "Then they'll send interceptors and we'll deal with them." The way she said it, "deal with them," was not boastful. It was not aggressive. It was mechanical. The same tone a technician uses when describing a repair procedure. "If this happens, we do this. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. "Captain," Brethon said carefully, "the Drekari deploy interceptors in packs of 8 to 12 vessels. Your escort consists of 3 frigates. The mathematics are not favorable." Vasquez nodded. "You're right. That's why I've requested additional support." She touched the display, and new markers appeared, green ones, 6 of them, moving toward our position from different vectors. "The Carthage battle group is redirecting to escort your convoy through the danger corridor. 6 additional warships, 2 destroyers, 3 frigates, and a missile cruiser. They'll rendezvous with us in 14 hours. I stared at the display. 9 warships total, an entire battle group for 12,000 refugees. "Captain Vasquez," I said slowly, "deploying a battle group to escort a refugee convoy through contested space, does your government understand the risk? If the Drekari engage your ships, that is an act of war against Earth." Vasquez looked at me with an expression I couldn't read at first. It took me a moment to identify it. It was resolve, not anger, not recklessness. The deep, quiet resolve of someone who has calculated the cost and accepted it. "Record Keeper Soreth," she said, My government authorized this deployment within 20 minutes of receiving my report. 20 minutes. The vote in the Security Council was unanimous. Do you know what the council chair said? I shook my head. She said, if the Drekari want to start a war over refugees, then they'll find out what happens when you start a war with Earth. The room was silent. We know the risk, Vasquez continued. We accepted it before I ever reached your convoy. This isn't a decision we made lightly, and it isn't a decision we'll walk back. Your people are under our protection now. That means something to us. It means everything to us. She paused and looked at Breathon, then at me. No one else came for you. We did, and we're not leaving. The battle group arrived on schedule. I watched from an observation gallery as the ships dropped out of FTL in a staggered formation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, each one bleeding light as it decelerated from superluminal speeds. The destroyers were larger than the frigates, stocky and angular, their hulls bristling with weapon emplacements. The missile cruiser was the biggest, a long, lean ship with a silhouette that reminded me of a blade. They formed up around our convoy without ceremony. No dramatic announcements, no displays of power. They just slotted into position, 2 destroyers at the front, frigates along the flanks, the cruiser at the rear. A protective shell of steel and resolve wrapped around 17 battered civilian ships and 12,000 people who had nothing left. Naeth was with me at the observation window. Elena had brought her, along with a drawing pad and some colored markers, human art supplies, bright and waxy. Naeth had been drawing quietly for the past hour. Shapes, mostly. Circles and lines, and sometimes something that might have been a face. When the warships arrived, she pressed her hand against the glass and watched them settle into formation. "Soldiers," she whispered. My heart nearly stopped. It was the first word she'd spoken in 6 days. "Yes," I managed. "Soldiers. Human soldiers, they're here to keep us safe." She watched the ships for a long time. Then she went back to her drawing. When she showed it to me later, it was a picture of a large blue circle surrounded by smaller triangles. The circle was us. The triangles were the warships. She had drawn them with the blue marker, every single one, arranged in a ring around the circle like a crown. She had labeled it in shaky Iathari script at the bottom. Safe. The transit through the danger corridor took 11 hours. I spent most of it in the communications bay, monitoring Drekari signal traffic with the Meridian's intelligence team. They shared their data openly, no classification barriers, no diplomatic hedging. A human intelligence officer named Lieutenant Yoon sat next to me and walked me through their sensor analysis in real time. "They know we're here," Yoon said, pointing at a cluster of signal returns on the edge of our detection range. 2 Drekari scout ships. They've been shadowing us for about 3 hours. Will they attack? Unlikely. Scouts are reconnaissance only. They're reporting our composition back to their fleet command. The question is what fleet command decides to do about it. And if they decide to intercept? Yoon smiled. It was a grim smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Then Captain Vasquez earns her combat pay. I watched the Drekari signals drift along the edge of our sensor range like predators circling a herd. They stayed for 7 hours. 7 hours of silent, creeping menace, while our convoy moved through the corridor surrounded by human warships that broadcast no threats, made no aggressive maneuvers, and simply held formation. At hour 8, the Drekari scouts turned away. They left. I asked Yoon why. He pulled up a tactical analysis on his screen. Best guess, they counted our ships, assessed our weapons loadout, and decided the math didn't work. We've got 2 destroyers carrying anti-ship missile batteries that can saturate their point defenses. The cruiser alone has enough firepower to gut a Drekari carrier. They're bullies, record keeper. Bullies pick fights they can win. This one they couldn't. He paused. Also, and this is just my personal theory, I think they weren't sure we'd actually fight. The Concordance never does. Other species posture and bluff and back down. But humans, we've got a reputation for being a little crazy. We might actually shoot. And nobody wants to be the Drekari commander who started a war with a species that fights like it has nothing to lose. Do humans fight like they have nothing to lose? Yoon looked at me. His smile changed, still grim but warmer underneath. We fight like we have everything to lose, record keeper. That's the difference. When you fight for something you love, you don't fight smart, you fight mean. We cleared the danger corridor at 03, 17 ship time. Vasquez announced it over the intercom, a brief, matter-of-fact statement that the convoy was now in open space and the direct threat had passed. Across the meridian, I heard sounds I hadn't heard in over a week. Laughter, crying, both at once. An elderly Iothari woman near our partition sank to her knees and began singing, one of the old songs, the ones from the Festival of Returning Light. Her voice was thin and cracking, but the melody was unmistakable. Others joined her. Within minutes, the entire cargo bay was filled with the sound of Iothari voices singing a hymn of gratitude that was written 1,000 rotations before humanity even discovered fire. Alina was standing near the entrance. She didn't understand the words, why would she? But she understood the meaning. I saw her wipe her eyes quickly, trying to do it when she thought no one was looking. I walked over to her. "Thank you," I said. It felt absurdly inadequate, like offering a pebble to someone who gave you an ocean. She shook her head. "Don't thank me. This is the job. This is what we signed up for." Why did you sign up for this? You could serve on any vessel, a combat ship, a patrol cruiser, something with glory and advancement. Instead, you're here in a cargo bay, wiping children's tears and handing out chocolate. Alina looked at me with an expression that I have spent years trying to describe and have never fully captured. It was fierce and gentle at the same time, protective and vulnerable, a contradiction that somehow resolved itself in the clarity of her eyes. "Because someone has to," she said, "and because my grandmother was a refugee. She came from a country that doesn't exist anymore on a boat that shouldn't have floated with nothing but my uncle wrapped in a blanket. She used to tell me, 'Alina, the world broke me, but one person held the door open. Be the person who holds the door.' So here I am, holding the door." She glanced at Naeth, who had fallen asleep on my shoulder. "She spoke today," Alina said. "You told me." "One word." "That's how it starts. One word, then two, then a sentence. Then a story. She'll tell you about this someday, you know, when she's older. She'll tell her own children about the time the humans came." I couldn't speak. The stone in my chest, the cold one, the one I had been carrying since the sky split over Eos, shifted. It didn't disappear. I don't think it ever will completely. But it moved just slightly, and in the space it left behind, something warm flickered to life. Something that felt like the beginning of survival. We arrived in the Sol system 18 days after leaving the Mirovan system. Earth appeared on the viewport screens as a blue-white sphere hanging in the blackness like a jewel in a velvet case. I had seen images of it before. Every species in the Concordance has a file on Earth, but the images didn't capture it. The blue was deeper than any image could render. The white swirls of cloud cover moved with a slow grace that made the planet look alive, breathing. Naeth was speaking in short sentences by then, 3 or 4 words at a time. She stood at the viewport and stared at Earth for a long, silent moment. "It looks like water," she said. She was right, it did. A planet made of oceans, wrapped in sky, spinning slowly in the light of a single yellow star. It looked like water. It looked like a place where things could grow. The convoy was directed to a region called New Zealand, an island nation in the southern hemisphere. The human government had prepared a settlement in a valley surrounded by green mountains and crossed by a river with a name I couldn't pronounce. Awas something. The humans had been building it for months, not for us specifically, but for whoever came next, because they knew someone would always come next. The settlement was simple but complete. Prefabricated housing units, each one large enough for a family, with insulation, plumbing, electricity, and windows that faced the mountains. A medical clinic staffed with human doctors who had been learning Iothari physiology from our medical database during the transit. A school. They had already built a school, with classrooms and desks scaled to Iothari proportions, and a playground with equipment that someone had clearly designed by studying images of Iothari children. A playground? They had built a playground for our children before we even arrived. I stood in the doorway of our assigned housing unit, Unit 47, a small structure with 2 rooms and a kitchen, and looked out at the valley. The mountains were impossibly green. The sky was a shade of blue that didn't exist on Eos. The air smelled like rain and soil, and something floral that I couldn't identify. Naeth walked past me into the unit. She found the bedroom. There was a bed with clean sheets and a pillow, and on the pillow someone had placed a small stuffed animal, a human toy in the shape of a furry creature with round ears. She picked it up. She held it against her chest, And then slowly, carefully, like a door opening after being sealed shut, she smiled. Not a ghost of a smile, a real one, small, fragile, and impossibly precious. "Father," she said, "can we stay here?" I knelt beside her. I put my hands on her shoulders and looked into her dark eyes, her mother's eyes, and I said the only thing I could say. "Yes, little one, we can stay." That was 5 years ago. Naeth is 14 now. She speaks 3 languages, Iathari, English, and a little Maori that she learned from the local human community. She goes to school with human children and Iathari children and a handful of Thessan refugees who arrived a year after we did. She plays a human sport called football, badly but enthusiastically. She has a best friend named Sophie who is human and who is teaching her to bake something called scones. She still has the stuffed bear from Unit 47. It sits on her shelf, worn and faded, one ear slightly torn. She won't let me repair it. She says the damage is part of its story. I work as a liaison between the Iathari community and the New Zealand regional government. It's good work, meaningful work. I help families navigate the settlement systems, translate documents, mediate cultural misunderstandings. There are misunderstandings, of course there are. Humans are strange and loud and emotional, and they have a baffling attachment to a hot brown liquid called coffee that they consume in quantities that would kill most other species. They argue passionately about things that don't matter, and then come together with breathtaking unity when things do. They are not perfect. I want to be clear about that. They have their own history of cruelty, of exclusion, of failing to live up to their own ideals. They will tell you about it themselves. Humans are remarkably, almost aggressively honest about their own failures. They teach their children about the worst things their ancestors did, not to celebrate them, but to make sure they are never repeated. That honesty is, I think, their greatest strength. They know what they are capable of at their worst, and they choose every day to be better, not because they always succeed, but because they keep choosing. The Concordance eventually passed a resolution condemning the Drekari invasion. 18 months after the burning. 18 months of committee meetings and procedural debates and diplomatic language, and they passed a resolution. Words on a screen, ink on paper, nothing behind it, no fleet, no consequences, just words. The humans, who had already taken in 26,000 refugees across 4 separate rescue operations, sent a single response to the Concordance Chamber. It was Captain Vasquez who delivered it, standing at the podium in a room full of alien diplomats who represented species older and more powerful and more sophisticated than humanity. She was still shorter than everyone else in the room. She still didn't care. "You wrote a resolution," she said. "We built a fleet, you expressed concern, we held the door open, you debated, we acted. So with all due respect to this chamber and its members, save your resolutions. The next time a convoy of refugees is dying in the dark, don't send words, send ships." She stepped down from the podium and walked out. The chamber was silent. I watched the recording of that speech 14 times. I cried every single time, not from sadness, from something I didn't have a word for in any language I spoke. It took me a long time to find the right word, a human word, one of those untranslatable terms that carries layers of meaning too complex for a single definition. The word is home. Not a place, not coordinates on a map, not a building or a planet or a system. Home is the sound of your daughter laughing in a language she learned from strangers who became family. It's the smell of scones burning because a 14-year-old and her best friend got distracted. It's a valley surrounded by green mountains on a planet made of water. It's a soldier kneeling down to meet your child's eyes and saying, "I'm your person." Home is someone holding the door open when the rest of the universe slams it shut. We came to Earth seeking refuge. Humanity gave us something no one else in the galaxy was willing to give. They gave us a place to belong. And God help anyone who tries to take it from us, because the humans will be standing right beside us, teeth bared, fists clenched, fleet at their backs. Not because they have to, because that's who they are.